Hi, so I'm live with Dr. Phil Hammond. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kish. It's a pleasure.
Oh, cheers. I'm more nervous than when I was interviewing Corbyn in the sense that that was recorded, so Jack could edit it, and that was good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over. If you could just introduce yourself to the audience, and I'll build an audience, and that'd be amazing. And then, yeah.
Okay, I'm Dr. Phil Hammond. I've been an NHS doctor for 30 years. I've also been a private eye investigative journalist for 24 years. So I specialise in helping and supporting NHS whistleblowers. And I've broken some big stories. I guess the Bristol Heart scandal was the biggest story I broke in 1992, and lots of other whistleblower stories. The good news is that I've never been sued for getting a whistleblower story wrong. The sad news is I've never been able to get an NHS whistleblower back their job. So speaking out in the NHS is still an incredibly hard thing to do, but we need these people. We need people in the front line who are not afraid to speak the truth to power, which is why I'm impressed by Kishan, because he's a young man with his career ahead of him who's been quite brave in speaking out. I'm an old fart, so I can say what I want, and I have private eye behind me, but I like to encourage young doctors who are sort of beginning their careers to feel free and do it. And another reason I was really motivated and inspired by the junior doctors movement. I don't think it has been a failure in any sense. I think it's extraordinary that so many young doctors have become engaged in the political process and realised essentially what a political organisation the NHS is, and that early stage in their careers having the bravery to speak truth to power, to campaign outside the Department of Health, to do that whole Justice for Health thing where you're actually finding out through the High Court whether Jeremy Hunt was legal in what he did, and the very fact that you got him completely to do a volte-face on saying that he wasn't going to impose the contract was really, I think, a really important point to make. So I salute you all, and I've been quite inspired by the junior doctors because it reminded me of my own campaigning days back in, golly, 1987, 88. I was a junior doctor.
Born in 86.
We used to work, there's nothing worse than old fart doctors saying, in my day, we used to work 120 hours a week. In my day, people died, basically. We had about 3 treatments. Open the window, extra potatoes and penicillin. I'm exaggerating slightly, but people would die. They wouldn't live forever in great numbers, which is... and also, if you made a mistake in the old days, you could burn the notes and bury the x-rays and laugh it off in the mess. These days we have a duty of candour where you're supposed to talk.
Well, do we have a duty of candour?
We're supposed to have a duty of candour.
Yeah.
I think that's why just about everyone has to be a whistleblower now, whether you're a patient, you're a carer, you're a concerned citizen, you're a frontline member of staff. We need to keep shouting out about the fact that we don't have enough money in health or social care, and as the 5th or 6th, depending on Brexit, wealthiest nation in the world,
talk about that
we should be putting money into the health service, and most people want to put that money in. They're not being given the opportunity to do so. So we have this fairly rabid austerity at the moment, which is quite a clever way of killing people who are unlikely to vote Conservative. But the point is that we need to put more money in, and most people want to put more money in, but they want it to be spent on treatments that are proven to work, and not to marketise political reforms that have no evidence base.
Absolutely, and I saw some of your tweets until you were interviewing me. That was good. I saw some evidence-based things that you said, let's try this, let's see what happens. And it's really interesting how you said that we're seeing reforms that are being forced through and driven through. But then you have other people saying, well, healthcare's not political. This isn't political. No. Don't talk about politics. We mustn't talk about politics. Look at the mess that we got into at Brexit by people not talking about it.
The purest view is that all medicine would be evidence-based, and we'd have an evidence-based unit in the Department of Health, so Jeremy Hunt or whoever the health secretary was could still come up with an idea in the bath, but for it to be pushed through the NHS, academics would have to analyse it and say, look, this is the evidence base. We could have done that with the junior doctor's contract. We could do it with 7-day working. It's not management consultants and lawyers and who are running the show. It should be academics. So in theory, yes, but we know that doesn't happen. We know that the NHS is intensely politicised. It shouldn't be. Yeah. And we should grow up and have a cross-party recognition of what needs to go into the NHS. And the public should decide how much money they want to put in, whether they're happy for the money to be tax-funded or whether they want to pay private insurance or top-up fees. I don't know. I presume not. Then they need to decide who they want the providers to be. Do they want to be a largely publicly provided service, or are they happy for it to be privately provided too? And
so you said in terms of cross-party consensus, one thing that I've been concerned about with that is you could potentially have people on both sides that are happy because this baton of privatisation has successfully been passed from successive governments. Is a cross-party consensus enough? Because, you know, who's talking to the patients in this?
I think that's really important. They keep saying it's your NHS. If you read the Constitution, it's supposed to be your NHS. The Health and Social Care Act, which was a disaster, but Andrew Lansley promised no decision about me without me. He promised that you would be included and involved in decisions about your care, and people aren't be. Sustainability and transformation plans have been developed in secret. They haven't been shared. this agenda, this whole notion of, they're desperate to, whether you call it privatisation or competition or outsourcing, they're desperate for the private sector to take over NHS work. And we tried it with private finance initiatives that have crippled the NHS. They're called paying for it indefinitely. They've crippled the NHS in debt.
I didn't think of it that way.
And
but
it
£3 for a light bulb.
But yeah, exactly, for the maintenance things. And we don't even own the hospitals. We've paid through the nose over 25 years. We don't even own the hospital at the end of the contract. So private involvement doesn't necessarily deliver good value for money.
Yeah.
Where I live in Bristol, Virgin are hoovering up loads of community services.
Yeah.
Are Virgin the people who should be running, I don't know, child protection schemes and things? I don't know. I need to be convinced of their competence, and yet they're just handed the contract with no public debate.
And nobody knows about it. And one concerning thing that I heard about Virgin was they let somebody triage somebody, I think it might have been in Croydon. They had no medical training whatsoever, and this patient sadly died in the corridor or the waiting area because they didn't actually see a medical professional.
Well, yeah, well, the point about, the trouble with all this stuff is it has to be documented and it has to be evidence-based, and the difficulty with raising concerns is you hear stories based on anecdote, but actually you have to document them and you have to provide the evidence and you have to collect the evidence. It's what I say to all NHS whistleblowers. They say something awful's happening. Well, actually, you have to collect evidence. So if you think that has happened, you have to take photos, you have to record documentary evidence, because if you don't have any of that, nothing will change.
Okay.
If you do as a whistleblower, even then, nothing may change, but you've got to have that trail of evidence, because as soon as you start raising concerns, sometimes evidence goes missing, and you've got to be careful of that.
Yeah, or buffing the notes, as they said in Bodies. I don't know if you've seen Bodies with Max Beasley.
Yeah, that was one of Jed Mercurio's. Jed Mercurio, who wrote Cardiac Arrest under the name of John Mercure, who was a Birmingham graduate.
Yeah.
Sadly, no longer in medicine. We need people like Jed now, but he writes very cleverly, I think, about problems facing the NHS.
I can remember watching that as a medical student before I read Medicine Balls and I watched Bodies, and I thought, nah, this is made up. This isn't the case. This can't be like that. But as I've kind of progressed through my career, I've seen, well, actually, there's elements of truth in all this. And that's the scary thing.
There is, but you also have to have balance. I had a chap who had a go at me the other day, and he said the trouble with this whole social media campaign by doctors is it's unremittingly negative. Generally, people post stuff that isn't going right.
Yeah.
And yet, if we want people to go into medicine of the future, people who might be medical students, yes, they have to go in with their eyes open, but we mustn't completely extinguish hope. So I think balance is important. And I met someone the other day who's still really enthusiastic about working in the NHS. And I had a mate who'd employed a refugee doctor who said, well, you know, the NHS has its problems, but it's not Syria. Yeah. And it's really important to get a certain balance, isn't there? So we still say it's a great job. Nobody goes into the NHS expecting it to be easy.
Yeah.
But what they want is respect and honesty and open debate with their leaders. What's interesting, if you go around the country and you say, can you name anyone on the major stage, a politician, someone in NHS England who motivates and inspires you, I've done it today at a practice managers conference, I can't find anyone. They will actually say the people who motivate and inspire me and make me want to do the job are other frontline workers and patients and carers who live with the most appalling stuff and get on with their lives. And actually that's where the leaders are, and we need a B-Day revolution in the NHS from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Nothing comes from top-down reform, we actually need to do it from the bottom up.
Okay, I mean, that's interesting in terms of Cameron said, I think it was in 2010, he said something about there'll be no major, massive top-down reorganisations. You know, the NHS is sacred. What's going on now with the STPs, which I'll be honest, I don't actually know that much about because
none of us
they're all
do,
secret.
They're largely secret now, and they should have been shared. And so people feel, well, maybe one of the things is they're going to hit this 10-year flatline funding pledge. Yeah. There's a 4 to 6% increase in growth in demand in the NHS year on year. If you have 10 years of flatline funding, and adult social care collapsing like a souffle, it's hitting the wall. The wheels are coming off it, so there's going to be a dance of death between Jeremy Hunt and Simon Stevens for who takes the can for this. But the danger is the STPs are going to lead to widespread merging and closures and rationalisation because they're trying to hit financial targets. When they did that with mid-staffs, care suffered. Yeah. They forgot about safe staffing guidance and patients were harmed. So we've got to be really careful to make sure everything in STPs is safe. Yeah. It's got to be well funded. It has to be safe above everything else.
In terms of mid-staff, you mentioned, I think I want to make a little correction to the video yesterday, since I incorrectly said that the lady protesting outside the Department of Health was a nurse. I got that wrong. She was actually a manager who was whistleblowing. And subsequently, I watched a video that Chris Day sent me, which was very interesting, and we can post that to people if you're interested. Talking to Chris Day, he made a little comment saying, Jeremy Hunt, the thought of him in a bath, thanks very much for that. So we could talk about Jeremy Hunt in a bath, or we could talk about kind of Chris Day's case, and he's another junior doctor that's been involved in this. Is there any stuff that you'd be interested in terms of... I mean, we did a fundraising video yesterday, and I think we hit... I don't know how much, but it was like a lot of money in an hour. £1,600 in an hour, I believe. Yeah.
What's interesting is you get all these platitudes from on high about now we are really listening to whistleblowers and there'll be no more cover-ups, and we have the Francis Review into whistleblowing, and we've got a whistleblowing Guardian, Henrietta Hughes, who said all whistleblowers need to cheer up and smile and it'll all be fine. And you see whistleblowers, NHS staff are stressed enough. Whistleblowers are the most stressed of the stress because they often lose their house, their family, their career, their mental health, just for speaking up, just for doing what's right. So Chris is absolutely right. He needs to pursue and understand how much legal whistleblowing protection junior doctors really have. Actually, senior doctors don't have much. I can quote a whole load of senior doctors who've been destroyed by blowing the whistle. As I say, they never get their job back.
What kind of cases?
Well, there's one called Ed Jesudason who's going to the High Court. The BMA are actually suing him to recover costs from a case where he handed over information to me that were court documents, and he admits that he made a mistake. But the reason he did that is that the BMA often in these cases want to reach a compromise agreement. So the BMA in whistleblowing cases often represents both sides. And so what they try and do is arrange a compromise agreement where you hush up the concerns, you take a payoff, you go and work elsewhere. But that most whistleblowers want the concerns to be made public, which is why they're doing. So Ed's concerns have never, I don't think, been properly investigated. And it's almost like a punishment beating for him because he's got no money. If he loses the case, which I think he will, because he definitely did something that he shouldn't have done in the High Court, he'll probably get £500,000 costs, which he doesn't have. Why is the BMA doing that? Do BMA members really want their money going on delivering a punishment beating for an NHS whistleblower? I would think not.
I would think not as well, and I think that's the critical thing with Chris Day's case. And we've seen, Justice for Health did a brilliant job. They took Jeremy Hunt to court. Sadly, it didn't go the right way, and the judge ruled in favour of Jeremy Hunt. But, interestingly, we've got loads and loads of footage of Hunt saying, we're going to impose it, So that's interesting. I think I have to look at this from the point of view of when I've got medical students that are saying, well, what do we do about whistleblowing? How do I say you've got to kind of raise concerns without kind of also caveating it that you're at risk of you're losing your house, your job, your family, your career, everything?
Well, the message is, and where the BMA needs to get its act together, the good thing about what it did is that it united whistleblowers en masse. So whistleblowing on your own, they will isolate you, and then it becomes really difficult because people brief against you. If you're a consultant, you'll have your secretarial support taken away, you'll lose your research project. They do all sorts of little things, and then they start questioning your mental health. You get very stressed because people aren't listening to you, and then they say, he's not really coping, he's not really one of us. So, and the sad thing is, in whistleblowing cases, a lot of the briefing is doctor on doctor. There are doctors briefing against somebody else who has ethical standards that says, look, I'm not prepared to accept this level of care we're providing for my family, so I'm going to blow the whistle. So you need to do it in numbers. It's safety in numbers. And actually, if as a whistleblower you get other doctors, you get nurses, you get managers, documentation if you can, you get your local MP involved, you get a local journalist involved. If you build that support network, you're far more likely to succeed and have the support you need than if you try and do it on your own. And that's what Chris needs to do. He needs to build as wide a circle of support as he can, including lawyers, including MPs, including other doctors.
And I think in terms of Chris's case, because I just did a video yesterday and I've been saying to him, I've been meaning to put a video out, and it's one of those things I didn't get time to put it across. And he wrote something yesterday, and he wrote that he apologises if he can't get the facts across. He apologises if he can't explain to 54,000 doctors how important it is. But when you've got an organisation like the BMA saying, well, it's rubbish, don't worry about that, ignore it, he is facing an uphill battle, and we need to get behind him. And scroll back on the page, the 146 people that are watching, look at the video from yesterday with Chris Day, watch it. In the link, I think there's a description of a video that I've done with him, and I've interviewed him, and I'll keep on doing interviews with Chris Day because we've got to get his story out, because it's critical to patient care, it's critical to patient safety. And for me, I'm getting really stressed about it, thinking, I've got patients coming in, potentially in A&E. You want them to be in an environment where if somebody has a concern, they raise that concern. So another word that you mentioned was revolution, which is good, and that ties us nicely into your UK tour starting next year. Health Revolution.
Well, it's actually I'm doing one in 25th of October. I'm doing Sheffield, so I'm up in Sheffield. I'm doing Winchester in November, but most of the dates are next year. It's partly to try cheer up anyone who works in or uses the NHS. That's really important, but also to encourage people to speak up as well. So the first half of the show is about sorting your own life out, and the second half of the show is about sorting out the NHS. And there are 2 shows I did up at the Edinburgh Fringe this year. So I did 46 shows in 23 days, so it's pretty well road tested. But it got a really nice response. I think a lot of what we can do to stay healthy is outside the NHS. We don't need to rely on other people, and actually trying to sort out your mental and physical health is really important. And then fighting for the NHS, because it's what glues us together as a compassionate society. The idea we put all our money in the centre and we pull it out according to need is the single most important thing in our culture. And if we lose that, and we start saying, you know, the healthcare you get depends on how much money you've got, we've lost probably the most precious thing we have. In this post-Brexit times, we need to cling on to the NHS more than anything, and all the overseas staff who work in it. 1.25 of doctors trained overseas. We need to love them and hug them, not tell them the NHS is going to be self-sufficient in doctors and completely destabilise them and talk nonsense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And there's an interesting comment here, which is, can whistleblowers collect evidence and leak it, in inverted commas, anonymously, a la the political party leaks, or is a WikiLeaks type thing only NHS?
A WikiLeaks thing for the NHS would be interesting. The difficulty is, if your case goes to the High Court and say you've passed information onto a third party and you haven't admitted to it, and the journalist has said, well, I'm never going to break your cover, I won't leak it. But if you're asked on a witness stand, as Ed Jesse Dayson was, did you pass information on? You have to decide whether you're going to tell the truth. If you try and plead the Fifth Amendment in an English court that I can't say thus on the ground it will incriminate myself, it generally doesn't go down too well with the judge. So it's difficult. You can say that and you can leak it anonymously. So even though we shouldn't be hunting or shooting the messenger, nearly always when something is leaked, the first thing people do is say, who's the mole, who's been leaking it, and they try and find out who you are. And you have to anticipate the possibility that you might be identified, even if, you know, it doesn't happen. And it's difficult because we should concentrate on the message. What matters is whether the message is true, not who the messenger is.
Absolutely. And the fascinating thing from that is, if you look at Elaine Bromley's case, with Martin Bromley and the difficult intubation in the airway, that's a book I read about in Matthew Syed. I think it's called Black Box Thinking. And they're talking about it shouldn't matter about who says what. We should be looking at these processes and how do we learn from them? How do we change them? And I think a comedy tour, it certainly fits in with my kind of approach in terms of getting the public on board, and I'm really keen to do that. So I've just got a message from my other half, Italian nurse, that's put me off. We want the Italian nurses to stay, hug them and care them.
We absolutely do. We absolutely do. Just for your mental health rather than anything else, Kishan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's good.
The comedy stuff's great because I get a mixed audience. In Edinburgh, I've got loads of junior doctors, which is nice.
Yeah.
So normally your audiences get older as you do. As an old fart, I tend to have people in their 50s and 60s. All of a sudden, I got loads of junior doctors come to Edinburgh. It was lovely to see them. I hugged everyone as they came in.
Yeah, I saw you shaking the hand as they're coming in.
Yeah,
Very similar shirt.
That was a tribute to Kate Granger. So the wonderful Kate Granger did the Hello, My Name Is. I was saying thanks to her too. So I shook 5,500 hands up at Edinburgh.
Did you have lots of hand gel in between?
I did. The only one who didn't, she was a microbiologist. She said, that's disgusting. I'm not shaking your hand. But I did have some hand sanitizer. So I think it's important to laugh. But comedy with a message is what I do. But I don't pretend comedy on its own changes anything. It just makes people feel valued and makes them laugh. But actually also, you have to get involved in the politics, whether you like it or not. The NHS is a political organisation, and you have to do the politics is actually about the ethical use of power. That's all it is.
Yeah.
The people who have power over us using their power ethically and responsibly and humanely. Simple as
Dr.
that.
Phil is a legend. When are you going to do some doctoring?
I do some doctoring.
I can be accused of
I
that
do
as
it
well.
part-time, and that's a very fair comment. No, I do it part-time.
Okay.
I couldn't do it, I'll be honest with you, I couldn't do it full-time. My mental health would not sustain full-time in the NHS. I know very few full-time GPs now.
Yeah.
I say to GPs, don't do more than 6 sessions patient-facing in the long term, or I think your head will explode.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. We train these new doctors, but the doctors are saying, actually, full-time in the NHS will kill me.
Yeah,
Your first responsibility is to protect your own health. And
Yeah.
if it's so stressful, I entirely understand doctors saying, I can't do this full-time. So for all of the doctors we train, usually we get 2/3 of a practising doctor max out
At
of
the
them.
end, yeah. And
But that's fine because, you know,
it
you
is
can't,
fine.
you can't do 100 hours a week every week,
Normal people,
or it will kill you.
Normal people think that's fine, but I've always thought that medical school kind of breaks people down into the image that they want, and basically SHOs, which are interchangeable blocks that can complete tasks and units of work. And there's almost this thing that within medical school, medical students are inherently competitive. They've been the top of their year. They could go off and do anything that they want. Oh, Dr. Day needs another 80 grand. That means he's hit 20 grand, which
Well, that's
is good. But I'm going off on a little rant, and I'm sorry, but it was
Well, you shouldn't. There's still that spirit of we had to do it and so should do it, never did me any harm, and nobody went to the NHS expecting it to be easy.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is Professor Michael West from the King's Fund, who's a world expert on stress,
Yeah.
says work-related stress in the NHS far exceeds any other organisation. He said we are killing people in the NHS through work-related to stress. We're killing the people who we're charged to look out, who care most, who are looking after us.
Yeah.
And that's an issue, is that you can't work people into the ground so they burn out. And we know with the NHS the most precious resource are its staff.
Yeah.
So love them and hug them, but they've got to have humane working conditions, otherwise the whole thing will collapse like a souffle.
So that's a fantastic point to end on. Love them, hug them. I'm really happy to be promoting your tours, and we'll do that, and we'll get people to do that. Of the 166 people watching, check out Chris Day's video. If you can give a quid, it'd be really good. If you can't give a quid, share it to loads of groups, tag loads and loads of friends, because some of your friends will be able to give a little bit of money to it. Let's get another spike in that. I don't know if you've got any ending little comments.
Not really, other than I love you, and if you come to my show, I'll hug you, and if you come to the show and you don't laugh, you get your money back, provided you can catch me as I disappear out of the fire exit. It's entirely up to you.
Cool.
Trust me.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're a doctor.
I am a doctor.
Part-time.
Just.
Sometimes.
I will be struck off, so come and see me soon.